On the season finale of OC Unsolved, we cover the crash of LZ-129, also known as the Hindenberg, at Lakehurst, New Jersey. But before we start, I want to make a quick announcement about the show. This series has not been getting a lot of views lately, and while I know views aren't everything, and I do love making this show, I think it would only be best to continue if the audience demand shows it. So if you want more OC Unsolved, let me know in the comments. Either way, this show will be going on a hiatus for a while after this, so thanks for an amazing Season 2, and let's get into it. Was it a fire, sabotage, or is the answer a bit more boring? Let's get into it. Germany had a long history with airships, from starting the first airline to pioneering the technology during World War I, using them to bomb the UK. But in the interwar period, airships saw their prime, being used mostly by Germany for civilian use, and in the United States, they were used even as flying aircraft carriers. One of the most famous airships was the Graf Zeppelin, an airship that truly changed what an airship could be. In 1931, however, construction began on a monster airship. It was designed by Hugo Echner, a man who envisioned a world where airships reigned supreme and were the primary way to travel. He designed the ship to be the largest and most luxurious in the world. During the First World War, he had gotten his start training Zeppelin pilots, and after the war, started designing them himself. He wanted to do what ocean liners were doing, but in the air. He ended up being very good at what he did. However, the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from building airships large enough to what Hugo wanted. However, he asked the US government to lift the restrictions, and, in return, he would build the US an airship. This would become the USS Los Angeles, and, after this, he started work on a giant airship. A similar size to the Los Angeles, this would become the Graf Zeppelin, a ship that set records and proved the viability of airships. It started transatlantic flights in 1928. Hugo himself would pilot the airship for this flight. After this, the Graf Zeppelin flew around the world with Hugo flying again. After Hugo returned to Germany, he was seen as a national hero. He was so popular, in fact, that he considered running for president of Germany. However, that same year, the Nazis were able to take control of the Free State of Prussia, then all of Germany. So, the fact that Hugo was trying to run for president made him a target, so he decided not to run. By the time the Nazis came to power, that big airship was still being built. The ship was called the Hindenberg. The Nazis decided not to arrest Hugo. They wanted to use the Hindenburg to push their message. However, Hugo hated the Nazis and criticized them a lot. Eventually, all newspaper publications from him went through censors. The Nazis funded the construction with one caveat. Hugo was forced to put a German flag on the back of the ship. However, there was one major issue. The US was the only producer of helium, which is a substance that you put in an airship to make it lighter than air so it can float. So, even though the USS Los Angeles was powered by helium, the difference between helium and hydrogen is that hydrogen is extremely flammable. Only positive is that hydrogen is able to lift more. Due to the Nazi takeover, the Hindenburg could not be powered by helium, as the US would not sell to them. So, the very dangerous hydrogen was used, but Hugo had worked with hydrogen lots in the past, and had great success. In 1936, the Hindenburg was finally completed. The Nazis immediately seized it and used it in the 1936 Olympics. Afterwards, the ship conducted its passenger flights. Throughout the 1936 season, the ship operated fine and got a lot of great reviews. Tickets at the time cost around $7,000 per person, but considering it went a lot faster than an ocean liner, it was a reasonable price for a lot. Interestingly, the passengers' cargo was actually put on an ocean liner to save weight. She could hold 72 passengers, was 236 meters long, making her the largest flying object in history. She could go 67 knots, and the passengers could only occupy a small area of the ship, housing lounges, restaurants, and even a pressurized smoking lounge. The ship had a separate gondola in front with a radio and controls for the gas bags. It's spelt with a Z. Speaking of which, the airship used a system of releasing gas and water to control the altitude. It also had a system of gangways going throughout the ship to reach the different areas and repair the bags. The room was also interesting, as none had their own bathrooms, and they were made of lightweight material, so you could hear your neighbors all the time. The ship operated normally and had good reviews, stopping services until March 1937. Its first flight in 1937 was a special flight from Frankfurt to Rio, then back. It stayed in Frankfurt for about a month before setting off for Lakehurst, New Jersey on May 3, 1937. The ship did not have a full load of passengers and was about half full, but it did have a fully booked load back to Germany. As the Hindenburg crossed the Atlantic, it encountered strong headwinds, which delayed its arrival a little bit. But over the Atlantic, there was also a minor incident. A small boy brought a toy car on board, and, for some reason, when he rolled the car on the floor, it emitted sparks. So, the boy had to have the car taken away. 3 days after leaving Frankfurt, the ship flew over Boston, a few hours behind schedule. However, a thunderstorm blew over Lakehurst, so, to give the passengers a view, the ship flew over New York. Then, 12 hours later, the Hindenburg received the all-clear. When it arrived, they would perform what was known as a high landing. Basically, it would go around the hangar to bleed off speed. Then, it would hover over the landing site and drop its lines. Then, the crew would pull it down, because the ship was so sensitive to weight that a few people with ropes could pull the entire thing down. At 7:11 p.m., the turn was completed and the captain threw the engines into reverse. But something was off. The ship was heavy at the tail, so he ordered water dumped from the stern, which helped for a bit. A few minutes later, the wind shifted and the captain ordered another turn to starboard. The ship kept having to dump water to even out the trim, but it kept getting worse, so the captain ordered crew to the front of the ship. At 7:21 p.m., the Hindenburg dropped its landing ropes and the crew began pulling the ship down. Then, someone on the ground noticed something strange about the ship. There was a fluttering motion at the back. He did not know what was going on, but he did notice that it was wrong. The crew on the Hindenburg had also heard a rumbling, but thought it was just the crew pulling the ropes. Then, suddenly, at 7:25 p.m., the back of the Hindenburg exploded into a massive ball of fire. The ship fell rapidly as everyone fell to their feet. All captured on film, the hydrogen exploded as the ship fell from the sky. Flames quickly spread toward the first cells 1 through 9. The rear of the structure imploded, and almost instantly, 2 water tanks burst out of the hull as a result of the shock. The blast threw the passengers down to their feet, and ground crew ran away while some tried to jump out. As the back hit the ground, the force was so much that fire shot out of the front of the ship as it came crashing down. Finally, it all fell. Journalists were there, as this was the ship's first flight to the US in the 1936 season, meaning that many angles of this exist. Immediately, emergency crews tried to put out the fire. Incredibly, though, most people survived. The reason that happened was that the ship was landing and people were near the windows. And also, you can see in the footage that when the ship falls, there are about 6 or so seconds, maybe even more, where, because the hydrogen is carrying the fire away from the passengers are able to jump out of the windows and run away quickly, meaning the main people that died were people that were still in their cabins or were on another inescapable part of the ship. It only took 37 seconds for the ship to crash, and 35 people to die, even quicker than it took for me to explain this. No one knew why the ship crashed, but one man was determined to get to the bottom of it, our hero, Hugo Echner. And with that, let's get into the theories. The first theory is sabotage. Hugo Echner believed that a shot from a gun could have destroyed the ship. He initially believed this after receiving threatening letters, but he later dismissed the theory after traveling to the crash site. A commander of the Naval Air Station at Lakehurst, and the man in overall charge of the ground-based portion of the Hindenburg's landing maneuver, came to believe that the Hindenburg had been sabotaged. He laid out a general case for sabotage in his book, What About the Airship? The captain of the Graf Zeppelin stated he believed it was sabotage due to both ships flying through storms multiple times and being perfectly fine, even after being struck by lightning. In 1966, A. Holing published a book called Who Destroyed the Hindenburg, theorizing that due to its use in propaganda and the fact that it was just in general a Nazi airship, made it a target for a lot of people. The book rejected all theories other than sabotage and named a crew member, Eric Spiel, a rigger in the airship who died of burns sustained during the crash. 10 years later, Michael McDonald wrote a book called Hindenburg, which was based heavily off Holland's book. This book was later adapted into a movie which mostly fictionalized the ship's final flight for Hollywood. I haven't seen it, but I'd love to make a review of the movie, so let me know if you want to see that. The producers of the film were actually sued by Holing for plagiarism, but Holing's case was dismissed because he had presented his sabotage hypothesis as historical fact, and you can't claim ownership to historical facts. Some evidence of Spiel's destroying the airship are: his girlfriend was a communist with Nazi views, the fire's origin was somewhere only Spiel's and other riggers were allowed to go, rumors of the Gestapo investigating Spiel in relation to the Hindenburg, the discovery by the NYPD bomb squadron of a substance later determined to be the insoluble residue of a deploralizing element in a small dry battery. Holing postulated that the dry cell battery could have powered a flashbulb in an incendiary device. Spiel's interest in amateur photography, making him familiar with flashbulbs, that could have served as an igniter. Holing stated it was unlikely that Spiel wanted to kill people, and that he wanted to destroy the Hindenburg when it was on the ground, but due to the ship being delayed 12 hours, it was too late. The second theory is a static spark. Hugo Echner, after dismissing the sabotage theory, argued that it was an electrical spark which was caused by a buildup of static in the ship. Proponents of the static spark hypothesis point out the airship's skin was not constructed in a way that allowed its charge to be distributed evenly throughout the craft. During the wait over New York, the ship passed through a weather front of high humidity and high electrical change. Okay, I'm going to get very sciencey with this, but this is kind of interesting. Although the mooring lines were not wet when they first hit the ground, and the ship caught on fire 4 minutes after, Echner theorized that they may have become wet in those 4 minutes because of the light rain. When the ropes, which were connected to the airship, became wet, they would have grounded the frame but not the skin. This would have caused a sudden potential difference between the skin and the frame, and the airship itself with the overlaying air masses, and would have set off an electrical discharge. One witness reported seeing St. Elmo's fire flickering along the airship's back, and in an episode of the Discovery Channel series Curiosity, titled What Destroyed the Hindenburg, which first aired in December 2012, investigated both the static spark theory and St. Elmo's fire, as well as a sabotage by bomb. The team, led by British aeronautical engineer Jim Sassfield and US historian Dane Grossman, concluded that the ignition took place above the hydrogen vent just above where Mark Heald saw St. Elmo's fire, and that the ignited hydrogen was channeled down the vent where it created a more explosive detonation. Due to all this evidence, this has been made the favorite theory by most scientists. Fourth theory is lightning. A.J. Desser, a former director of the Space Science Laboratory at NASA, has stated that he thinks it was lightning. Now, airships don't usually get lit on fire just due to lightning, just like planes don't. However, when it's venting hydrogen and that hydrogen mixes with oxygen, it can start a fire. And, of course, the ship was letting out hydrogen, as when you mix the hydrogen and oxygen, it can turn even more flammable. Wow, this video has basically become a Vsauce video. There are many other theories, but these are the three ones I find more likely. The inquiry concluded that the spark theory was the most likely, saying that the fluttering was the tail leaking hydrogen. After the investigation, the site was cleared with some metal being shipped back to Germany. The Hindenburg sister ship never carried passengers and was mostly just used for propaganda flights and espionage missions. The original Graf Zeppelin also stopped passenger flights after it concluded its last flight. After that, in 1940, the two airships were scrapped. After the crash was recorded, public trust in airships crushed faster than the ship itself. Hugo, despite his hatred of the Nazis, survived the war living in Germany, and, after the war, he founded Stuttgart. He started writing about advocating for French-German cooperation, and in 1947, he was fined 100,000 Reichsmarks due to his involvement with Nazi Germany. He was eventually rehabilitated soon after. He lived in Schleswig-Holstein and was active in local politics until 1954 when he died at his home. Due to the crash, the golden age of airships ended, but recently airships have been making a comeback due to new technology and new ways to make helium. Oh, and before I go, remember to send me questions in the comments so I can answer them in the OC Unsolved Extra episode. With the golden age of airships over, a potential spy plot, and Season 2 concluded, the crash of the Hindenburg remains unsolved.
It's frightening, terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's running, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the morning fast, and all the folks with me, this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.